Somewhere out past the dragoons, where the land forgets to be kind, there's a house that shouldn't be standing. I want to tell you it was built by a man with money, or a crew of 40, or the Lord himself in a good mood. It wasn't. It was built by one woman with cracked hands and a mule that hated her, out of things other people threw away, a barn door with the hinges gone, wagon wheels split down the spoke, tin cans hammered flat, and a stubbornness so complete it frightened the men who came to run her off. I've kept a habit most of my life. I carry stones in my coat. Small ones, river smooth. At night I line them up and count them, one for every day I've stayed alive when I had no business doing so. The night I met her I had 11,000 and something. I stopped counting after that. She gave me a different way to measure a life, not the days you survive, but the ones you decide are worth building on. This is the story of how a woman made a home out of castoffs and hope, and how a broken-down cowboy arrived just in time to be saved by her. Because that's the part nobody tells right. Everyone thinks the cowboy does the saving. He doesn't, not this time. Stay with me, it gets hard before it gets warm. The wind came off the flats like it had a grudge, and I heard the shouting before I saw the house. I'd been 3 days without speaking to a living soul, which suits me fine most weeks. My horse, a sour bay gelding named Pardon, because I'd bought him cheap off a man I never forgave, had thrown a shoe that morning, and I was leading him on foot through country that had no reason to hold a person's interest, when the wind carried men's voices to me. Not friendly ones. There's a pitch a man's voice takes when he's decided he's allowed to do a cruel thing, and I've heard it enough to know it from a quarter-mile off. I came up over a low rise, and there it was. I'll try to describe it the way I saw it that first minute before I knew anything, because the knowing changes how a thing looks. It was a house, or the beginnings of one, squatting against the base of a red rock shoulder like something that had grown there rather than been placed. The walls were a patchwork. Adobe brick low down, then a stretch of gray barn siding gone silver with age, then a section that I swear to God was made of flattened tin, cans nailed shingle fashion so the whole west wall caught the light and threw it back in 1,000 little coins. A door stood in the middle of it, a proper heavy door, oak by the look, hung slightly crooked but hung. Around the place ran a low wall of stacked stone and old wagon parts, waist high, the kind of thing that wouldn't stop a determined man but would make him think about his footing. And in front of that door stood a woman with a rifle she wasn't pointing at anybody, and 3 men on horseback who very much wanted her to point it so they'd have a reason. I stopped where I was. I'm ashamed to say I stopped. A better man would have come down the hill fast. I stood there with Pardon's reins in my fist, and I counted the men, and I counted her, 3 and 1. And I did the arithmetic a coward does, which is to say I looked for the way to keep out of it. Then one of the men swung a coil of rope off his saddle and threw a loop over the corner post of her stone wall, and dallied it, and started to back his horse. He meant to pull the wall down, to start with the wall and then, I understood, work his way to the rest. The woman moved, she didn't shout. She stepped forward and put her boot on the rope where it lay across the top of the stones, and she said something I couldn't hear low, and she didn't lift the rifle, and there was in the set of her shoulders a thing I have spent the rest of my life trying to describe and failing. It wasn't bravery, exactly. Bravery has fear underneath it, fear it's overcoming. This was closer to arithmetic of her own. She had measured what the wall was worth to her against what her life was worth, and she'd found them equal, and she was done being afraid of the difference. The man spurred his horse, the rope came taut, the corner post and old wheel hub set in mortar groaned. I came down the hill. I don't remember deciding to. My legs decided. I've noticed they do that sometimes, my legs, when the rest of me is too much of a coward to be trusted. I left Pardon standing, and I came down that slope with my hands out and open, and I heard my own voice saying, loud and stupid and friendly, "Now hold on there, that's a fine morning to be tearing up a wall, ain't it, fellows?" The kind of noise a man makes to buy a second. 3 heads turned. The rope went slack as the rider let his horse ease up, curious. The woman did not turn her head. She kept her eyes on the men and her boot on the rope, but I saw her register me a flick, a taking of account. One more thing on the board. She hadn't decided yet whether I was a 4th man or a 2nd side, and I didn't blame her, because standing at the bottom of that hill with my chest heaving, I hadn't decided either. The one who'd thrown the rope was a big fellow, red under the sunburn, with a hat gone shapeless from being sat on. He looked me over. "This ain't your business, mister." "No," I agreed. "It surely ain't. I got no business anywhere, that's God's truth. I'm just a man walking a lame horse." I let them see Pardon up on the rise, favoring his bare hoof and honest detail, and I watched it do its small work of making me harmless. But I'll tell you, I've been walking 3 days, and I ain't had a thing to look at but rocks. And I come over that hill, and I see the most peculiar house I ever laid eyes on, and now you want to pull it down before I get a proper look. Seems a shame. "It's built on vain land," said the second man, younger, eager, the kind that repeats what he's been told like it's his own. "Is it?" I said. "It is," said the big one. "Mr. Vane's got title to everything from the wash to the ridge, and squatters don't hold on Vane Range. She's been told, 3 times told." I looked at the woman then full for the first time. She was younger than the weathering of the place had led me to expect, 30 maybe, though the sun ages everyone out here past their years. Apache. Her dress was a settler's dress, gray, mended so many times at the elbow that the mending had its own mending, and over it she wore a man's canvas coat far too big, the cuffs rolled. Her hair was tied back with a strip of red cloth. Her hands on the rifle were steady, and they were the hands that had done everything I was looking at. I could see it in them, the flat-nailed, split-knuckled work of them, and the burn scar that ran up one wrist where she'd handled hot tin without a glove, or, more likely, without the luxury of caring. She looked at me looking at her hands, and something crossed her face. Not gratitude. She wasn't fool enough for that yet, just a noticing that I'd noticed the right thing. "There's title," I said slowly, turning back to the big man, "and there's title. A judge draws a line on a map in Tucson. Fine, but a wall a person built with her own hands stone by stone, that's a different kind of holding, seems to me, older kind." I was talking to fill the air, mostly, talking to keep that rope slack. "How long you been out here, ma'am?" She spoke for the first time, and her voice surprised me. Low, even a little rough, the English careful the way a person's is when they learned it from necessity rather than a mother. 2 years, she said. The wall is 1 year. 1 year to build a wall, I said. Doing what for the rest? Living, she said, just that. The big man had had enough of me. "Mister, you can move along or you can watch. Don't matter to me, but this comes down today." He gathered his slack again. The horse leaned into it. "And here is where I'll tell you the true thing about that morning, the thing I've never told straight because it doesn't flatter me. I did not draw a gun. I don't much like them, and I'm slow with the one I own. I did not fight 3 men. I am 51 years old that year, and I've been beaten by fewer than 3 and remembered it a long time. What I did was I walked over slow, hands still open, and I sat down on the wall. Right on the top of the stones, next to where her boot held the rope. I sat down on it like a man sitting on a fence to chew and pass the time of day, and I said, 'Well, if it's coming down, I'll ride it down. Been a long walk. My legs are done.' There was a silence. You understand, they could still have pulled the wall, but now there was a white man sitting on it. A witness on it, a body on it, and whatever Mr. Vane paid these men for, it wasn't for what it would mean out here to drag a stone wall down onto a stranger and answer for it later. The arithmetic had changed, and they knew it, and the big man knew that I knew it, and he hated me for it in a way I found I could live with. He flung the rope off the post. 'You're a damn fool,' he told me. 'Been called worse by better,' I said. 'Vane'll hear about this.' 'I expect he will.' They sat their horses a moment longer, the way men do when they need the leaving to be their idea. The young one said something ugly to the woman, the kind of thing I won't write down, about what she was and what she'd end up. She didn't flinch. I've thought since that not flinching was its own kind of muscle, built up over a long time the way the wall was built. One insult set on the last, until it stood waist-high and would take more than words to knock over. Then they rode off toward the wash, and the dust hung in the air behind them, gold in the low sun, and settled slow. I stayed sitting on the wall. My hands, I noticed, had started shaking now that they were allowed to. "You can get down," the woman said. "Give me a minute," I said. "I told a lie about my legs, but it's coming true." She almost smiled. I saw it try and not quite make it. She lowered the rifle, uncocked it. She'd had it cocked the whole time, I hadn't heard it, and she leaned it against the door frame within reach. And she looked at me sitting there shaking on her wall, and she said the second thing she ever said to me, which was, "Your horse threw a shoe." He did. I have a forge. I looked at the tin can wall, at the crooked oak door, at the whole improbable standing fact of the place. "Course you do," I said. "Course you do." Her name was Sansi. She told me that afternoon, not as a gift, but as a practicality, the way you'd tell a man the name of a tool he'd need to use. It had been her grandmother's name. She didn't tell me what it meant, and I didn't ask, having learned somewhere along the trail that a person's name is theirs to explain or not. The forge was real. It sat under a lean-to on the north side, a proper little field forge she'd gotten, I learned later, off a wagon train that had lost more than it could carry and sold what it couldn't. And she'd freighted it back on a travois behind the mule across 11 miles of broken ground because there was no road, and there was no help, and there was, in her account of it delivered flat over the fire that night, no other way, so she did it. That was how she said most things. There was no other way, so I did it. As if the doing followed from the fact the way rain follows cloud, as if a person's will were just weather. I shod pardon myself, her working the bellows, and while I worked I looked at the place from the inside for the first time, and I will try to tell you what I saw, because it mattered to what came after. Every single thing in that house had been something else first. The table was a barn door on 2 sawhorses. The sawhorses were wagon axles. The bed, I could see it through the doorway, was a rope-strung frame she'd built from the sides of shipping crates, and the ropes were harness leather knotted and stretched. She'd made shelves from the ends of whiskey barrels, curved and dark. She'd made a cradle from a half-barrel, sanded soft, hung on a frame so it could rock, and I looked at that cradle a long time before I understood I was looking at it. And then I looked away, because there was no child in it, and I did not yet have the right to ask. She caught me looking. She always caught me looking. "I make things from what people leave," she said. "People leave a great deal out here. They come with wagons full of everything they own, and then the land takes it a piece at a time, and they leave it where it falls because they cannot carry grief and furniture both." She set down the bellows. "I carry the furniture." I'd never heard it put that way. I've never forgotten it. The tin can wall, she explained, was newest, because tin was the last thing to come easy. A town had gone up 11 miles east, and a town makes tin the way a body makes sweat, and she walked in every few weeks with the mule and came back with the panniers full of flattened cans she dug from the town's midden, and she hammered them flat again where they'd bent, and she nailed them up, and that was why the west wall shone. It shone because it was made of what a town threw out. I have thought many times since about the sermon in that, and never found the bottom of it. That first night she fed me beans and a flat bread cooked on a stone and a piece of jerked venison so hard I had to gum it, and it was one of the best meals of my life, and I told her so, and she looked at me like I was simple. "It is beans," she said. "It's beans in a house a person built out of nothing," I said. "That's a different bean." She thought about that. "Yes," she allowed, "that is a different bean." And I laughed, and after a moment she did too. A short, unpracticed sound, like she'd found it in a drawer she didn't open often, and pardon stamped in the lean-to, and the fire popped. And for the length of that laugh, the whole hard country outside seemed to hold still and let us have it. I want to be honest about myself here, because the temptation in telling a story like this is to make the narrator better than he was. I did not stay because I was noble. I stayed because I was tired. Because I was 51 and hollow, and I'd been walking away from things for 30 years. A wife dead in Kansas of a fever I couldn't buy medicine for. A boy I'd left with her people because I couldn't look at him without seeing her. A string of jobs and towns and men I'd disappointed. And I lined up my river stones every night and counted the days I'd survived, and never once, not once in 11,000 days, had I counted a day I'd built anything. And here was a woman who had built a house from the leavings of everyone who'd given up. And Vane's men were coming back. Everyone at that fire that night knew they were coming back. It didn't need saying. So I said the thing instead of the saying-needing thing. I said, "Your latch is crooked." She looked at the crooked oak door. "The hinge is bent." "I can straighten a hinge," I said. "Got a forge and everything, I hear." She was quiet a moment. Then she said, "One night for the shoeing, you owe me nothing after." "I know it," I said. But I straightened the hinge in the morning, and there was a rail down on the corral, and the roof, on the barn siding stretch, let daylight through in a way that wouldn't do come the monsoon. And each thing led to the next thing the way it does when a man has decided something he hasn't admitted to yet. And Sansi let me do them without thanks, and without asking me to stay, and without asking me to go, which I have come to believe is the hardest and kindest way one broke-down person can treat another. 3 days I stayed, then 5. On the 6th day the men came back, and there were more of them, and one of them was Vane. I knew him for the owner before anyone said it, by the way the others sat their horses when he was among them, a little straighter, a little quieter. He was a compact man, gray, expensively plain, with the kind of face that has decided long ago that it is reasonable and has never once been troubled by evidence to the contrary. He didn't shout. Vane never shouted the whole time I knew him, and that was the worst thing about him. He'd have a man's house pulled down in a voice you'd use to order coffee. "You'd be the drifter," he said to me, not unkindly. That was the thing, not unkindly. "I'd be a man doing some repairs," I said. "On my land? On her house?" He nodded slowly, as if I'd confirmed something. He looked past me at the house, at the tin wall, throwing his own face back at him in 100 little coins, and I watched him look at it, and I understood something about the whole business that the ropes and the shouting hadn't told me. It wasn't the land. Vane had more land than he could ride across in a day. It was that the house existed. It was that a woman with nothing had made a standing thing out of the exact refuse his kind of prosperity left behind. And it stood there in plain view of the road, and every teamster and drover who passed could see it standing, and its standing was a question, and Vane was a man who could not abide a question he hadn't authored. "I'll make it simple," he said to her now, not to me. "There's a paper says this is mine. You can't read it. Doesn't matter. Law's the same for the blind." He said it plainly, a thing he found regrettable and true. "I've been patient because patience is cheaper than trouble, but my patience is a line item and it's run out. You'll be off by the end of the month or you'll be taken off, and I'd rather it were the first." He turned his horse. Then he paused and looked back, and here he did the cruelest thing, and I've never decided if he knew it was cruel or if cruelty was just the shape his reasonableness took. "It's a fine house," he said. "Truly, I've never seen the like, a beat. It's a shame you built it in the wrong place." And he rode off, and left that sitting on the fire of the whole thing like a coal you can't pick up and can't leave. I found Sansi that evening out by the tin wall. She had a hammer and she was not fixing anything. She was just standing with her hand flat on the shining tin. On the cans, she'd carried 11 miles and beaten flat and hung, and her face was doing nothing at all, which by then I knew was how her face looked when it was doing the most. "End of the month," I said, stupidly. She'd heard him. "Yes. Where would you go?" She didn't answer that. Instead she said, without turning, "You have stones in your coat. I hear them, at night. You take them out and put them back." I hadn't known she'd heard. "A habit," I said. "I count them, days it's foolish, days I lived when I figured I wouldn't." She turned her head then and looked at me with those flat, dark, tired eyes, and she said, "How many?" 11,000 and some." I stopped. "When did you stop?" I didn't answer right away because the answer surprised me even as I found it. "The morning I came down the hill," I said. "Haven't counted since." She looked back at the wall. Her hand moved on the tin, a slow, flat stroke, the way you'd gentle an animal. "I do not count days," she said. "I count what I have made. It is a better arithmetic, days you cannot keep. They pass through your hands like water, and you are always poorer at the end than the start." She tapped the tin once with one knuckle, a small, bright sound. "But a wall you can keep, until a man with a paper takes it." And then, and this is the part I have to set down carefully, because it is the hinge the whole story turns on, she said, quiet, not to me really, to the wall, to the dark coming down over the red rock, to whatever it is a person talks to when they've run out of people. "I built it for him to come home to, and he is not coming home, and now they will take even the walls." I did not ask who. I'd seen the cradle. I had, God help me, the beginnings of a guess. But I did not ask, and she did not say, not that night. She set the hammer down on the top of the stone wall, gently, the way you'd lay down something living, and she went inside, and I heard the crooked door no longer crooked. I'd fixed the hinge, close soft behind her. I sat out by the tin wall a long time. I took the stones out of my coat, and I lined them up on the top of the stones she'd stacked, 11 of them, the ones I carried closest, and I looked at them a long while. Then I put them back in my coat, all but one. One I left on her wall, I don't know why. It felt like the only thing I had that was mine to leave, and it felt like it belonged there more than in my pocket. And maybe I was starting, at 51 years old, out past the dragoons where the land forgets to be kind, to learn her arithmetic. that a thing you build and leave is worth more than a day you keep and count. The end of the month was 19 days off. I decided, sitting there in the dark with the tin throwing back the last of the light, that I would still be there when it came. I hadn't been anywhere at the end of anything in 30 years. I found I wanted, more than I'd wanted the next town or the next bottle or the next long empty road, to be somewhere when the hard thing came. I didn't tell her. Some decisions you carry a while before you're fit to say them. The rains came before the men did, and the rains nearly did their work for them. You who have not seen a monsoon build over that country cannot know how it feels to watch it. For days the sky to the south stacks itself up, thunderheads climbing on thunderheads, purple-bellied, silent, promising. The air goes thick and coppery. The animals get strange. Pardon wouldn't settle. He'd stand with his head up and his nostrils working, reading a weather I could only half feel. And Sansi worked. Whatever else the weather did, it made her work faster because she knew she'd been through 2 of these seasons in this place, that the barn-siding stretch of roof would not hold, and the ground behind the house channeled water off the red rock shoulder like a funnel, and if she didn't cut a trench to turn it, the wall might go. Not to vein, to water. There's an irony in it I've never gotten over, that after all the men and ropes and papers, the thing that near took her house was the same sky that grudged her every green thing she tried to grow. So we dug, both of us, that first bad afternoon, in the thick coppery air with the thunder walking closer. We cut a trench along the uphill side to turn the coming flood around the house instead of through it. She dug like the digging was an argument she intended to win. I dug beside her and tried to keep up and mostly failed, being 51 and soft in ways I hadn't known till a shovel told me. "You should rest," she said once, not slowing. "You should," I said. "I do not have the—" She searched for the word, found it, and it was a bitter one, the luxury. "You are a guest. Guests may be tired." "I'm not a guest," I said. "Guests get thanked. You never thank me for a thing." She stopped digging then. She stood up straight with the shovel and looked at me, rain starting now, the first fat drops smacking the dust, and something in her face I hadn't seen before, a wariness, but turned inward like she was wary of herself. "If I thank you," she said, "then you have done me a kindness. And if you have done me a kindness, then I am in your debt. And I have learned." She wiped rain and grit from her eye with the back of her wrist, the burned wrist. "I have learned what happens to a woman like me who is in a man's debt. So I do not thank. I let you go when you wish to go, and you owe me nothing, and I owe you nothing, and no one is in anyone's debt, and that is the only safe way for 2 people to stand near each other." She said it fast and flat, the most words she'd yet strung together, and then she looked almost frightened at herself for saying them, and she bent back to the digging. I dug a while in silence. The rain came harder. Then I said, "My wife's name was Ellen. She died of a fever in Kansas because I didn't have $3 for the medicine that would have broke it. $3. I had a horse worth 40 and I wouldn't sell it because I told myself we'd need it to get to where things be better, and she died in the going, and I've had a lot of horses since, and I don't recall a one of their names." I kept digging. "I'm not telling you that to be pitied. I'm telling you because you gave me something true just now, and it's rude to take a true thing and give nothing back. That's my true thing. I let people down. It's the one skill I've kept up." She didn't stop digging, but after a while she said, quiet under the rain, "The cradle is for a boy called Sella. He would be 2 years this summer." And then the storm broke over us proper, and there was no more talking, only the water and the wind and the 2 of us fighting to turn a flood. And I did not learn the rest of it until the storm had passed, 3 days on. And by then the trench had held, and the house still stood, and the telling came the way water comes off that rock all at once, when it finally comes. Here is what she told me over 3 nights in pieces, while the monsoon hammered the tin and made the whole west wall roar like a drum. She had married a man. Not Apache, a white teamster named Call, an Irishman, a big laughing man by her spare account of him, who freighted between the town and the fort and the mine, and who had done the unthinkable thing of marrying her in a country that had no place for the marriage and less for the child of it. They'd had the boy Sella. Call had picked this spot, the red rock shoulder, the spring that ran even in June, because it was, he said, the one place nobody wanted, and a thing nobody wants is a thing nobody takes. He'd laughed when he said it, she told me. He'd been wrong, but he'd laughed. And then Call had gone out with a freight run in the winter of the boy's first year, and a wagon and 4 mules and a big laughing Irishman had not come back, and they never found enough to bury. Only the wagon down a wash with the tongue snapped and no sign, and she'd waited, and the boy had waited in his own not knowing way. And then in the spring of the next year the boy took a sickness in his chest, the wet cough. And she'd carried him 11 miles to the town on the mule, and the town's doctor had looked at the boy and looked at her, and named a price she could not pay and would not, that same day, extend on credit to a woman like her. And she'd carried him 11 miles back, and he had died in the barrel cradle that Call had made it, not her. That was the thing she'd never said and said now, weeping without a sound the way I'd learned she wept, her face doing nothing while the water ran down it. Call had made the cradle, and she had made everything else in the house around it, an entire home built outward from a dead man's cradle for a dead child, Castoff by Castoff, because building was the only thing that kept her hands from being empty, and empty hands, she said, empty hands were the thing she could not survive. So you understand, she said on the third night when the rain had gone soft and the tin had quieted to a patter. When Vane says it is a shame I built it in the wrong place. It is not the wrong place. It is the only place. It is the place they were. Every wall is a year I stayed where they were. If I go, they are nowhere. If I go, there is no place left in the world where Call picked the spot and Sella slept, and it is all only water and rock and a paper in Tucson that says a man who never saw them owns the ground they are buried in. Her hand was flat on the barrel cradle. It rocked, empty, a little under her hand. I do not build for the future, she said. I have no future to build for. I build so the past has a house. I have carried a great many things in my coat over my life, and none of them ever weighed on me like those words. I did not say anything wise. There is nothing wise to say to that. I got up and I put more wood on the fire, and I sat back down closer than I had before, close enough that she could have leaned and I could have taken the weight if she'd wanted to give it, and she did not lean, and I did not push, and we sat like that a long while with the fire between us and the rain gentling on the roof of a house built to shelter the dead. And that, I have come to think, is the truest thing two people can do for each other when the words have all run out. Sit near enough that leaning is possible, and leave the leaning up to the one with the grief. Toward morning she said, "Why did you not count your stones last night?" "You'd know if I had, you always hear." "I did not hear." "That's because I didn't," I said. "I told you." I stopped. "You should count," she said. "It is your arithmetic. A man should not give up his arithmetic. It is how he knows he is still alive." "I got a new arithmetic," I said. "I'm learning yours. Count what you make, not what you keep." I nodded at the room, at all of it, the barrel shelves and the axle table and the crate bed. "Problem is I never made anything, so my number's low. I'm starting late." She looked at me across the fire a long moment. Then she got up, and she went to the tin wall, the inside of it, and she pried loose one flattened can that she'd not yet nailed tight. There was always a loose one, always the next one going up, and she came back and she put it in my hands. It was cold and light, and it had been a peach can once. You could still read half the word peach stamped in the tin. "There," she said. "Now you have made one, nail it up tomorrow, west wall. That is your one." I held that flattened peach can like it was made of something other than tin. "That's cheating," I said. "You made it. You dug it out of a town's garbage and hauled it 11 miles and beat it flat. I'm just gonna hang it." "No," she said, and for the first time since I'd come down that hill she almost smiled all the way. "I make them from what people leave. You are what people left, so." She sat back down. "You count now, too." And I did not have any answer to that at all, so I held my peach can, and the fire burned down, and the rain stopped sometime before dawn. And when the sun came up, it came up on a house still standing, and a trench that it held, and two people who had, without either of us saying so, stopped being strangers passing and started being something the language out there didn't have a clean word for. 11 days left in the month. I nailed the peach can up on the west wall the next morning, and I did a poor job of it, and she watched me do the poor job without offering to help, which I understood by then was her way of letting a thing be truly mine, poor job and all. And then, because I could no longer stand the not doing, I told her my decision, the one I'd been carrying since the night by the wall. "I'm not going," I said. "End of the month, when they come, I'm going to be here." She was quiet. "I know what you'll say," I went on quick because I did know. "You'll say I owe you nothing and I can go and it's safer for me to go and you don't want to be in my debt or me in yours, and that's all true. But I've been going my whole life, Sansi. I've left every hard thing at the moment it turned hard. I left Ellen dying in a way, I mean I was there, but I'd already left. In my head I was already down the road looking for the next thing. I left my boy. I've left towns and jobs and men who trusted me, and I'm tired. I'm so tired of the leaving that the staying, even the staying to lose, even the staying to get run off or beat or worse. The staying sounds like rest. Does that make sense? It's not brave. It's the opposite of brave. I just don't have another leaving in me. She looked at me a long time. The morning sun came off the tin and lit half her face gold. They will hurt you, she said. Vane's men, they will not hurt me worse than words, because a hurt woman is a story that travels and he does not want the story. But a drifter, a stranger, no one to miss him, they can hurt you and no story travels. You understand this? You are choosing to be the one they can hurt. I know it. Why? And I gave her the truest answer I had, which was not a noble one, which was maybe the least noble true thing I ever said. And it was. Because I'd rather be hurt somewhere that means something than safe somewhere that don't. She turned away from me then. She put her hand on the tin wall on my badly nailed peach can, and she stood like that with her back to me, and her shoulders were not doing nothing now. They were shaking, small, and I did not go to her because I had learned. I left the leaning up to the one with the grief. After a while, without turning, in a voice gone rough, she said the third true thing she gave me, and it was the one that broke me, sitting there in the gold morning by a house built for the dead. I have not wanted a person to stay, she said, since I stopped believing anyone would. It is a dangerous thing you are doing. You are making me want it again. 10 days left in the month. And that night, for the first time in 30 years, I slept without lining up a single stone, and I did not lie awake counting the days I'd survived, because for the first time in as long as I could remember, I was not trying to survive at all. I was trying to stay. There's a difference. I hadn't known there was a difference. She taught me that, the way she taught me everything, without once meaning to, just by being a woman who built a home from castoffs and hope in the one place in the world. She was forbidden to build it. The men came on the 29th day. But that is part 3, and I need a moment before I tell it, the same as I needed a moment then. They came on the 29th day, a day early, which I should have expected, because a man like Vane counts patience as a line item and would begrudge the last day of it. There were 6 of them, and there was Vane, and there was, riding at the back with a leather folder held flat on his saddlebow like it was hot, a thin, nervous man in town clothes who I took for a clerk or a lawyer, some paper person brought to make the taking legal-looking. They came up the road in the early light with the dust rising gold behind them the way it had the first morning, and Sansi and I watched them come from the doorway of the house. And I had my old slow gun in my belt, and I knew I would not draw it. And she had her rifle in her hands, and I knew, by then, that she would not raise it either, because raising it was the story Vane wanted, the story that would let him do the worst thing and call it defense. Whatever happens, I said low, you don't lift that rifle. You lift it, they win the argument. You keep it down, they've got to be the ones to start it, and they've got to do it in front of that clerk, and men like Vane don't like witnesses to the raw thing. She glanced at me. You have thought about this? I've done nothing but think about this for 10 days. That is more thinking than you have ever done in your life, she said, and it was a joke, a real one, her first, delivered flat with those tired eyes, on the morning that might be the last of everything, and I laughed, I couldn't help it. It came out of me like a bark, and Vane, riding up, heard a man laugh at the door of the house he'd come to pull down, and I watched it trouble him. It was the only weapon I had, and I'd found it by accident. A man like Vane can face a rifle. He cannot easily face being laughed at by the people he's come to ruin. It makes a small crack in the wall of his reasonableness, and through the crack comes the possibility that he is not, after all, a reasonable man doing a regrettable thing, but only a cruel one, and cruel is a thing Vane could not afford to be to his own face. He reined up at the stone wall at the corner post where the rope had gone the first morning, where a single river stone still sat on the top of the stones, my stone, the one I'd left. He looked down at us. You're still here, he said to me. Seems so. I took you for smarter. Everybody does, it's my best quality, looking smart. I stepped down off the low porch stone toward him, slow, hands open, the old harmless walk. Mr. Vane. Before your man there gets his papers wet, I want to say a thing, and then you can do what you came to do. He should have cut me off. I've wondered since why he didn't. I truly think, it was that no one had spoken to him plainly in a long time, everyone around him being paid to agree, and some starved part of him wanted to hear what a man with nothing would say to him with nothing to gain. Say it, he said. You told her it was a shame she built it in the wrong place. I stopped a few feet from his horse. I've had 10 days to look at this house, Mr. Vane, closer than you ever will. You want to know what it's made of? It's made of your leavings, not yours personal, your kind's. The tins from the town's midden. The barn sidings off a homestead the drought broke. The wagon parts are from folks the trail killed. Every stick of it is something somebody with more than her threw away and rode on from. She's the only person in this whole country who didn't ride on. She stayed and she picked it up and she made it mean something. I heard my own voice getting away from me and I let it. And there's a boy buried out back of that rock and his father somewhere under a wash, and she built every wall of this so there'd be one place on God's earth that remembered them. That's what your paper says you own, not land. A woman's grief with a roof on it, and you can take it. You've got 6 men and I've got a bad knee and a slow gun. You can surely take it. But you'll know what it was you took, that's all. I just wanted you to know it before instead of finding out after. Because you look to me like a man who's going to find out after either way. I'd just as soon you didn't say later that nobody told you. There was a long silence out there in the gold morning. The horses shifted. The clerk in his town clothes was looking at the house now, at the shining tin wall, really looking, the way I'd looked the first day, and I saw the house do its slow work on him the way it did on everyone who truly looked. Vane did not look at the house. Vane looked at me. And his reasonable face did a thing I'll remember to my grave. It held still, the way Sansi's did when she was feeling the most, and I understood that I had, with nothing, with only words, gotten in past the wall of him, and that he hated it, and that hating it was the most human thing I ever saw him do. Sentiment, he said at last, is not title. No, I agreed, it surely ain't. The law is the same for the blind. You said that before, it's a good line, you practice it. And there it was again, the crack. His jaw tightened. Behind him, the big sunburned man shifted his rope hand, waiting for the word, wanting the word. Vane did not give the word. He sat his horse a long moment. Then he did a thing that I have turned over every day since and never fully understood, and I've decided that not understanding it is right, because a man is not a sum you can foot up, and the day you think you've got a person's total is the day you've stopped seeing them. He reached down, not for a gun, not for the rope, and he picked up my river stone off the top of the wall, the one I'd left. He turned it over in his gloved fingers, this smooth, small nothing of a stone, and he looked at it like it was going to tell him something, and then he looked back at me. There's a stone on this woman's wall, he said. That doesn't match the others. River rock, come a long way to be here. He was not really talking to me. Everything else in this place was left by someone who gave up. But somebody carried this here on purpose. He weighed it. That's a different thing. That's mine, I said. I left it there, don't rightly know why. No, Vane said. You wouldn't. And he set it back exactly where it had been, careful, the way you set down something that isn't yours. Then he turned his horse. Coombs, he said to the clerk, the title on the dragoon shoulder, the 11 acres at the spring. Yes, Mr. Vane. Draw it over too? And here he stopped and looked at Sansi for the first time direct, and there was nothing soft in it. I won't pretend there was, only a hard, tired reckoning, one hard, tired person to another across a distance neither would ever cross, to whatever name she gives you. Sell it to her. $1, make it legal. Make it so no man after me can undo it with a paper, because I'll not have it said I did this, and then let the next Vane take it back. A beat. It's a fine house. It was built in the wrong place. I find I'd rather move the line than the house. And he rode off. He rode off without another word, 6 men trailing after him confused, and one of them, the big one, furious, and the clerk sat there blinking with his folder. And Sansi and I stood at the door of the house that shouldn't be standing, that would now, by $1 and a hard man's inexplicable mercy, go on standing, and neither of us moved, and neither of us spoke for a long, long time. I'd like to tell you Vane did it because my words moved him. I don't believe that. I've thought about it more than any other thing in my life, and I believe the truth is smaller and stranger. I believe a man who had spent his whole life owning things, and being certain looked at a stone that had been carried a long way on purpose, in a place full of things that had been dropped by people giving up, and something in him that he'd long ago paved over felt the difference between the two, between what's left and what's brought. And for the length of one morning, it was more than his reasonableness could bear to be. One more time, the kind of man who drops things and rides on. Or maybe he was just tired too. Maybe out past the dragoons, where the land forgets to be kind. Everyone is more tired than they let on, and now and then the tiredness comes out sideways as mercy, and we call it a change of heart because we can't stand to call it what it is. I don't know, I told you I wouldn't know. Here is how it ends, the part I can tell. Coombs the clerk drew up the paper on the axle table inside the house, and Sansi gave her name, her full name, the one that was her grandmother's, that I will not write here because it was hers, and she gave it to a title and not to a story, and I gave $1 out of the 4 I owned, and it was done, and 11 acres at the spring on the Dragoon shoulder belonged, in the eyes of a law that had never once been on her side, to the woman who'd built the only true thing on it. Coombs left, the dust settled, and Sansi stood in the doorway of her own house on her own land, and she did not weep, and she did not laugh, and she did not thank me. She never once in all the years thanked me, and I never once wanted her to, because I understood by then that her not thanking was the deepest thing she had, the last wall, the one that meant we stood near each other free and clear, no one in anyone's debt, 2 people who'd been left choosing every day to stay. She went to the west wall. She pried loose a fresh flattened can. There was always a next one, and she came back and she put it in my hand, cold and light, and she said, "Nail it up." "That is your 2. And I nailed it up next to the peach can, and I did a poor job of it again, and she watched me do the poor job, and the sun came off the tin in 100 little coins, and somewhere out back of the red rock a boy called Sella slept, and somewhere under a wash a big laughing Irishman lay, and the house they'd been remembered by would go on standing now. And I understood that I had, at 51 years old, finally arrived somewhere at the end of a hard thing instead of leaving before it turned. And that the arriving had not cost me what I'd feared, and had given me what I'd stopped believing a man like me could have. That night I took the stones out of my coat, all 11 of them, and I did not count them. I went out to the wall in the dark, and I set them along the top of it, one after another, all of them next to the first one, and I left them there. Every day I'd survived laid out on a house built to hold the ones who hadn't, and I came back inside and I sat by the fire near enough to lean, and this time